Chosen. 1. Stop everything you're doing right now. I need your full attention. Not half focus, not background listening while you scroll, not something you play while multitasking. What I'm about to share requires your presence. There is a reason you found this message at this exact moment, and it's not coincidence, algorithm luck, or random chance. While preparing this message, something about you caused a pause and intentional silence. And that silence wasn't human, it was recognition. You did something recently, something so natural to who you are that you probably dismissed it as insignificant. You didn't announce it, you didn't plan it, you didn't do it to be seen praised or rewarded. In fact, you may not have realized anything unusual happened at all. But what felt ordinary to you created a shockwave in realms you cannot see. What you demonstrated was not expected, not from someone who has endured what you've endured, carried what you've carried, or survived the weight you've been under. Your attitude, your response, the way you handled pressure, left God impressed. Not mildly pleased, not casually approving. Impressed in a way that caused heaven to take notice. Impressed in a way that made Archangel Michael commander of celestial armies, warrior of light, the one assigned to battles far beyond human comprehension, pause what he was doing and turn his attention directly toward you. That alone should tell you this wasn't small. This message isn't meant for everyone. It's meant for the one who had every reason to break, but didn't. For the one who could have responded with bitterness, anger, or withdrawal, and chose something higher instead. You weren't supposed to respond the way you did. Statistically, spiritually, emotionally, it didn't make sense. Yet you did. And that decision marked a turning point you may not yet fully understand. Before I go any further, subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications because what you're about to hear will permanently change how you interpret your past struggles, your silent victories, and the battles you fought alone with no recognition. Stay until the end because I will reveal the exact attitude that made heaven stop and observe you, why Archangel Michael personally requested your case, and what this means for what is about to unfold in your life next. And if you felt it lately, that subtle but undeniable shift inside you, like you crossed an invisible line and can never go back to who you used to be, write 777 in the comments. That feeling isn't imagined, it's confirmation. Let me explain something that will help everything else fall into place because without this understanding, the depth of what you did might be lost on you. In the realms beyond what human eyes can perceive, observation is constant. Souls are not drifting unnoticed through existence. There are assignments, records, patterns being watched, not out of judgment, but out of purpose. Angels are assigned to guide, protect, and observe, especially when a soul carries unusual potential. And among all those souls being observed at any given moment, most human behavior follows predictable cycles. Pain produces bitterness. Betrayal produces anger. Injustice produces revenge. These reactions are so common they barely register anymore. They are expected. They follow scripts written long before this generation ever arrived. But every so often, rarely unexpectedly, someone breaks the pattern. Someone responds in a way that doesn't align with history, statistics, or human psychology. When that happens, it creates something that can only be described as a pause, a moment of celestial attention, a recognition that something uncommon is unfolding in the human realm. And that moment happened because of you. It wasn't during a season of strength. It wasn't when everything was going right. It happened in the middle of pressure that felt personal, targeted, and relentless. You were facing something that seemed carefully designed to drain you. A situation that hit not just your circumstances, but your heart. Something that tested your patience, your trust, your sense of fairness. You were tired. You were carrying weight that no one fully understood. And anyone looking from the outside would have understood if you had reacted differently. They would have justified it. They would have defended it. They might have even encouraged it. But you didn't respond the way pain usually trains people to respond. And this is important. What you did was not mere endurance. Survival alone does not create spiritual distinction. Many people survive because they have no other option. They push forward out of habit, fear, or numbness. That doesn't move the heavens. What you demonstrated was not survival, it was sovereignty. You stood in a moment where you had every right to let anger take the lead, every reason to hold on to resentment, every justification to harden your heart and protect yourself by becoming colder, sharper, more guarded. And yet something within you refused to surrender your character to the situation. The pain was real. This wasn't imagined offense or hypersensitivity. You were genuinely wronged. Words were said, actions were taken, lines were crossed. And in that moment, your human instincts were loud. Your mind likely rehearsed what you could say, what you could expose, how you could defend yourself or strike back. Every logical pathway pointed toward retaliation or withdrawal. That's how humans preserve their sense of power when they're hurt. But you made a different choice. It may have looked small from the outside, a pause, a restraint, a quiet decision not to escalate, a refusal to become cruel even when cruelty was justified. Maybe it was a conversation where you could have dismantled someone with the truth and you chose silence instead. Maybe it was an opportunity to protect your ego by exposing someone else's flaws and you chose to protect them instead. Maybe it was a moment where walking away would have been easier, cleaner, safer, and you stayed choosing effort over escape. That moment matters more than you know, because in that instant, you demonstrated something that most people never do. You proved that your responses are not owned by your wounds. You showed that your identity is not negotiable, even under pressure. That who you are is not something circumstances get to rewrite. This is where heaven leaned in, because most humans are reactive beings. Their behavior mirrors their environment. Treat them well, they reflect kindness. Treat them poorly, they reflect hostility. Their character fluctuates based on how safe, respected, or validated they feel. You broke that cycle. You revealed that your character is internally anchored, that no external force, no betrayal, no injustice, no emotional provocation has the authority to dictate who you become. This is not moral superiority. This is spiritual maturity, and it is exceptionally rare. From a celestial perspective, this is not just admirable behavior, it is strategic. It signals a soul that can be trusted with influence, a soul that won't become dangerous when wounded, a soul that won't spread darkness when darkness is directed at them. This is why what you did registered beyond your personal life. This is why it was recorded. Your guardian angel had been observing the situation unfold. This is standard. Every internal struggle you navigated, every thought you wrestled with, every urge you resisted was seen. But when you made that choice, when you responded with grace instead of justified anger, something unusual happened. Your case was flagged. Not because something went wrong, but because something went extraordinarily right. Escalation in the spiritual realm doesn't happen casually. Guardian angels are empowered to handle most human matters. They only elevate a case when they observe a response that exceeds expected human capacity. What you demonstrated crossed that threshold. Your response didn't fit within normal classifications. It required higher level attention. When your case reached Archangel review, it wasn't presented as a crisis. It was presented as an anomaly. A soul responding from a frequency that shouldn't be accessible under that level of stress. When Archangel Michael reviewed the report, what caught his attention was not just the action itself, but the context. You didn't choose grace from a place of comfort, you chose it while under pressure, while actively being challenged, while the emotional cost was real and ongoing. In spiritual terms, this is known as a transcendent response. It's when a human answers darkness with light while still bleeding, not after healing, not after resolution, but in the middle of the wound. This response is so rare that it's automatically flagged because it indicates a soul operating beyond instinct, beyond conditioning, beyond ego. It reveals alignment with something deeper than emotion. Michael reviewed your recent history, not just the moment itself. He saw the pattern, the quiet consistency, the unseen battles, the repeated choice to do the harder right instead of the easier wrong. He saw that this wasn't a performance. You weren't trying to be spiritual. You weren't aiming to be noticed. You were simply being who you are when no one is watching. That consistency is what distinguishes chosen ones who fulfill purpose from those who only carry potential. And here is what makes this even more significant. You did this without knowing it mattered. You didn't receive immediate reward. You didn't get validation. You didn't even get clarity at the time. You chose integrity without proof that it would benefit you. You chose grace without confirmation that it would change anything. This is the very quality that separates human souls from every other created being. Angels operate with direct awareness of divine reality. Their obedience is informed by sight. Humans operate behind a veil. You choose without seeing the outcome. You act without knowing the impact. You love without assurance that it will be returned or recognized. And yet you chose rightly anyway. That is what made heaven pause. That is what turned an ordinary moment into a recorded one. That is why this section of your journey matters more than the visible milestones you've been chasing. Because before doors open, before blessings accelerate, before assignments shift, heaven looks for one thing above all else: who you become when you are wounded. And in that moment, you revealed that your spirit is not governed by circumstance, but by truth. What happened next explains why this moment didn't end with recognition alone, but became a turning point that altered how your entire journey is now being handled. Because once Archangel Michael recognized what you had demonstrated, the focus shifted from observation to evaluation, and from evaluation to decision. This is where your story moved out of the realm of personal growth and into the realm of spiritual consequence. When Michael examined your case more closely, he didn't just look at the isolated incident that triggered the review. He traced the pattern backward. He studied the terrain of your life, the pressures you've been under, the resistance you faced, and the internal battles you fought without witnesses. He saw how often you were pushed to the edge of your emotional capacity, how frequently you were tested in ways that would justify collapse, retaliation, or disengagement. And what stood out wasn't that you never struggled, it was that you struggled honestly and still chose rightly. This distinction matters. Heaven does not expect perfection. It recognizes effort, intention, and alignment. You weren't operating from denial or spiritual bypassing. You felt the anger. You felt the hurt. You felt the injustice. But you didn't allow those emotions to hijack your identity. That's what elevated this from moral strength to spiritual authority. At this point, Michael requested a direct audience to discuss your case. This is not procedural. It's exceptional. His responsibilities span dimensions, territories, and ongoing conflicts that affect entire regions of existence. For him to pause and request time specifically for one human soul signals that something uncommon is unfolding. And when your case was brought before the divine council, it wasn't presented as a request for intervention, correction, or rescue. It was presented as evidence, evidence that something extraordinary is happening in the human realm, evidence that a soul is operating beyond projected timelines, evidence that the ceiling placed on human response under pressure is lower than what humans are actually capable of. You became a living case study. Michael presented the moment you chose grace, not just the external behavior, but the internal struggle behind it. He showed how your human nature pulled you toward reaction while something deeper held steady. He demonstrated the cost of that choice. The sacrifice involved the personal discomfort you absorbed to prevent the spread of harm. And then he showed the pattern that surrounded it, how this moment was not an exception, but an expression of who you've been becoming over time. That's when something shifted in the room, because consistency changes how heaven responds. Anyone can rise once under pressure. Few do it repeatedly without applause. You didn't just pass a test, you revealed a trajectory, and that trajectory triggered a response that went far beyond what you were aware of. When God responded, it wasn't with thunder or spectacle, it was with recognition, a statement that carried weight because of who spoke it and what it implied. This one reminds me why I created humans. Those words weren't sentimental, they were evaluative. They identified a quality that exists only in humanity, the ability to choose light without direct confirmation that light will win. Angels obey in the presence of divine reality. Humans choose in its absence. That makes your faith different, your integrity different, your grace different. You acted without seeing the outcome, without hearing affirmation, without knowing your response was being recorded or would matter at all. And that is precisely why it mattered so much. This is also where Michael realized something he hadn't expected. When your file first crossed his awareness months ago, his assessment was standard. He recognized your potential. He noted your sensitivity, your capacity for empathy, your ability to perceive beyond surface reality. He saw the outline of your calling, but his projections followed normal timelines. Growth through gradual reinforcement, maturity after confirmation, authority following visible victories. That's how most chosen ones develop. What he didn't anticipate was that you would demonstrate advanced spiritual capability while still in the middle of unresolved hardship. Because what you did wasn't just morally admirable, it was strategically devastating to the forces working against you. Every attack directed toward you had an objective: to pull you out of alignment, to distort your frequency, to provoke you into reaction so that you would step onto ground where resistance could claim influence. Darkness thrives on reaction. It feeds on mirrored energy. When pain produces pain, it multiplies. When anger meets anger, it escalates. That's how cycles continue. But when you chose grace, you disrupted the entire mechanism. In spiritual dynamics, energy doesn't vanish, it transforms. When negative intent is met with positive response, it doesn't land, it reverses. What was sent to destabilize you loses its authority and returns to its source without a target. This is not poetic language. This is how alignment works. You didn't just protect yourself, you neutralized the attack entirely. Michael watched this happen, not as theory, but as outcome. And what stunned him was that you did it instinctively. You weren't applying a learned technique. You weren't consciously engaging in spiritual warfare. You were simply being who you are at your core. That told him something crucial. This level of operation is not something you borrow, it's something you carry. That realization altered everything. Because souls who carry this frequency don't need constant intervention. They don't need to be shielded from every storm. They transform the storms they walk through. And that makes them invaluable in places where darkness has learned to operate unchecked. From that moment forward, your case was no longer treated as developmental, it was treated as operational. This is where the consequences of your choice began to show up in ways you may have noticed but not understood. Attacks didn't just stop working, they began backfiring. People who intended harm found themselves entangled in their own instability. Situations that were meant to block you collapsed under their own weight. You didn't orchestrate this, you didn't retaliate, you simply remained aligned, and alignment did the work for you. At the same time, something else began to settle over you: peace. Not the absence of challenge, but calm within it. A steadiness that didn't make sense given the circumstances. This peace is not emotional detachment, it's protection. It's the byproduct of heightened attention. When heaven leans in, chaos loses its ability to dominate your inner world. You may also have noticed clarity emerging where confusion once lived. Decisions that felt impossible now feel obvious. Direction that was foggy now feels intuitive. This is not coincidence, it's access. When a soul demonstrates trustworthiness, information flows more freely. Guidance becomes quieter but more precise. You don't hear more noise, you hear truth more clearly. And as your internal environment shifted, your external environment began reorganizing. People who were misaligned drifted away. Relationships that drained you dissolved without dramatic conflict. Doors closed that you once forced open. This wasn't loss, it was clearance. Your new frequency cannot coexist with what once survived on your doubt and overextension. All of this is connected to what was decided next. When God expressed recognition, it activated a protocol reserved for rare cases: accelerated fulfillment. This does not mean shortcuts. It means confirmation that extended preparation is no longer necessary. You have already proven what others still need to demonstrate. Your character eliminated the need for delay. As a result, timelines began compressing. Opportunities moved forward. Resistance lifted. What once required struggle now requires discernment. This acceleration is not random. It's earned through consistency, not through performance, but through alignment. But elevation always comes with responsibility. Heaven did not invest this level of attention for your benefit alone. You are being positioned because your presence carries something transferable. The grace you demonstrated under pressure is meant to be witnessed by others standing where you once stood, not through teaching, but through being. Your life will quietly answer questions people don't know how to ask. This is why Michael recorded your final classification carefully. Demonstrated warrior of light. Demonstrated because you proved it under real conditions. Warrior because you are engaged, not passive. Of light because you fight without becoming what you oppose. This is the highest frequency of engagement. It doesn't dominate, it transforms. This classification changes how heaven responds to you. Resources are prioritized. Your prayers are weighted differently. Not because you are favored arbitrarily, but because you have proven capable of carrying influence without abusing it. And this is why the story isn't ending here. Because what you revealed about yourself has recalibrated what's possible through you. And what comes next will not just reflect where you're going, but who you've already proven yourself to be. What follows now is not speculation or promise, it is interpretation. Because by this point, the shift has already begun, and Section 3 is less about what will happen and more about helping you understand what is already unfolding and why it feels so different from anything you've known before. Once a soul is recognized at this level, the effects don't remain confined to the unseen. They spill into daily life, into relationships, into timing, into atmosphere. And if you've been paying attention, you've already seen the evidence. The first sign appeared quietly, almost subtly, but it carried unmistakable weight. What was meant to harm you stopped landing the way it used to. Think back over recent weeks or months. Think about words spoken against you, intentions aimed at you, efforts made to destabilize you. In the past, similar attacks might have drained you, shaken you, or sent you into spirals of overthinking. But this time, something strange happened. They didn't stick. In fact, in many cases, they reversed. People who aimed negativity toward you began experiencing sudden disruptions in their own lives. Plans fell apart, stability cracked, things they once controlled slipped through their fingers. This wasn't vengeance, and it wasn't coincidence. It was alignment enforcing boundaries on your behalf. When a soul operates from integrity under pressure, protection intensifies around that soul automatically. Attacks are no longer permitted to land unchecked. Instead, they lose authority. What was sent out returns to its source because it can't anchor in you anymore. This is one of the clearest signs that your spiritual status has shifted. Opposition doesn't just fail, it exposes itself. At the same time, you may have noticed something else that doesn't quite make logical sense. Peace. Not the fragile peace that depends on everything going right, but a deep, steady calm that holds even when circumstances remain unresolved. Problems didn't vanish overnight. Responsibilities didn't disappear. But the internal chaos quieted. You found yourself breathing easier in moments that once would have overwhelmed you. You slept differently. You thought more clearly. You stopped feeling like you were constantly bracing for impact. This peace is not emotional numbness, it's imparted stability. When heaven increases its focus on a soul, it stabilizes that soul's internal environment so external chaos loses its power to dominate. This is why you've been able to stand in situations that would have crushed you before. You didn't become stronger by force, you became steadier by alignment. Then came clarity. Decisions that once felt paralyzing began to resolve themselves internally. You didn't suddenly receive a map, but you started sensing direction. You began knowing what not to do without needing long explanations. You recognized misalignment faster. You trusted your instincts more deeply, and they proved accurate. This wasn't guesswork. This was upgraded access. When a soul demonstrates trustworthiness, information flows differently. Guidance becomes quieter but more precise. Instead of dramatic signs, you receive subtle knowing. Instead of loud instruction, you receive internal alignment. This is because you no longer need constant correction. You've proven you listen even when the voice is faint. As your inner world stabilized and sharpened, your outer world began reorganizing itself. This is the part that often confuses people because it feels like loss before it feels like progress. People began exiting your life sometimes abruptly, sometimes without conflict, sometimes without explanation. Relationships that once consumed your energy dissolved. Situations that kept you stuck resolved themselves without your effort. Doors you had been forcing closed quietly on their own. You didn't push these things away. You didn't orchestrate the changes. They happened because your frequency changed, and what could once coexist with you no longer could. This is divine reorganization. When a soul is prepared for acceleration, the environment must be cleared of what would slow, drain, or distort it. Heaven removes what you would have struggled to release on your own. And alongside all of this, a feeling began to grow subtle but persistent, a sense that something significant is approaching. Not excitement exactly, not anxiety, more like standing at the edge of a threshold. You couldn't explain it, but you felt it. A quiet anticipation, a knowing without details. This isn't imagination, it's awareness. Your spirit is sensing movement before your mind has language for it. This is what happens when a soul enters accelerated fulfillment. Under normal circumstances, chosen ones progress gradually. Preparation stretches across years. Breakthroughs come slowly. Resistance remains constant. But when character is proven early, when integrity under pressure removes the need for extended testing, timelines compress. This doesn't mean recklessness. It means readiness. Blessings that were scheduled for later move forward. Opportunities that were once distant begin appearing now. Doors open that weren't supposed to open yet, and not because you demanded them, but because you qualify for them. You've already demonstrated the one thing that can't be taught quickly, who you are when it costs you something. Acceleration also means opposition changes form. Instead of constant resistance, you'll notice neutralization. Certain struggles simply stop recurring. Certain battles end without closure conversations. Certain threats lose interest in you altogether. This isn't retreat, it's reassignment. When a soul proves it can't be destabilized through reaction, there's no strategic value in continuing the same approach. But with this shift comes a responsibility that cannot be ignored. Your elevation is not for isolation, it's for transmission. The grace you demonstrated under pressure is not meant to remain contained within you. It is meant to be seen not in performance but in presence. You are being positioned to encounter people standing at the same crossroads you once faced, people deciding whether to harden or soften, whether to retaliate or rise, whether to become what hurt them or become something higher. You won't need to convince them. Your life will speak. Your calm will challenge their assumptions. Your consistency will quietly unsettle their excuses, not because you are superior, but because you are evidence. Evidence that it is possible to remain whole under strain. Evidence that integrity doesn't weaken you, it fortifies you. This is why heaven invested so deeply in your case, and this is why your final classification matters. When Archangel Michael recorded your designation as a demonstrated warrior of light, every word carried weight. Demonstrated because you proved it in action, not theory. Warrior because you engage reality, not avoid it. Of light because you refuse to fight darkness by becoming it. This matters because not all warriors fight the same way. Some fight from anger, which burns fast, but consumes the one who wields it. Some fight from duty, which sustains effort, but lacks transformative power. Fighting from light means engaging from love, truth, and restraint. It means your presence changes environments without force. It means darkness loses ground simply because you remain who you are. This classification follows you now. It shapes how heaven responds to you. It affects how resources are allocated, how guidance flows, how protection manifests. Not because you are favored arbitrarily, but because you've proven trustworthy with influence. Heaven invests where integrity has already been demonstrated. And with this classification came a personal note, something rare, something recorded not for procedure, but for remembrance. It acknowledged that your response to pain expanded what heaven understands to be possible for humanity, that the limitations often attributed to human weakness are not flaws in design, but outcomes of choice under pressure. You chose differently, and in doing so, you shifted the narrative. The note made something else clear as well. The path ahead will not be free of difficulty, but difficulty will no longer be corrective. It will be contributive. You will be entrusted with situations where grace is required because you've shown you can carry it without collapsing or corrupting it. These assignments are not punishment, they are privilege. And this is the final thing you need to understand. The attitude that caught divine attention is no longer something you access occasionally. It is now part of you. It has been reinforced, recognized, and encoded through repetition. You don't have to strain to become this person you already are, and everyone who comes close enough will feel it. This message reached you now because you needed confirmation. Confirmation that your silent choices mattered, that your unseen victories were recorded, that the weight you carried was not wasted. You didn't know heaven was watching when you chose grace. You didn't know your response would recalibrate your future. You didn't know that simply being who you are would leave an impression at the highest levels. But that's exactly why it did. You weren't performing, you were authentic. And authenticity under pressure is what changed everything. And now, as this message comes to its close, it's important to understand that nothing you've just heard was meant to inflate you. It was meant to anchor you. This conclusion is not an ending, but a confirmation, a moment of alignment where what you felt internally is finally given language. Because deep down, before these words ever reached you, you already knew something had changed. You felt it in the way you no longer react the same way, in the way certain things no longer tempt you, in the way you've outgrown spaces that once felt familiar. This message didn't create that shift. It named it. You didn't stumble into this recognition by accident. You didn't qualify because you were louder, more visible, or more impressive than others. You qualified because you were consistent when it was costly, because you chose grace when no one would have blamed you for choosing bitterness, because you protected your character when protecting it gained you nothing in the moment. Those choices were never wasted. They were recorded, they were weighed, and they were honored. What comes next in your life will feel different, not because everything suddenly becomes easy, but because you are no longer being shaped, you are being trusted. There is a difference. Shaping applies pressure to reveal character. Trust applies opportunity to release it. You are moving from refinement into responsibility, from preparation into placement. And that transition often feels quiet before it feels obvious. As you move forward, remember this: you do not need to prove who you are anymore. You've already done that in moments no one saw. Stay aligned. Stay grounded. Stay gracious, not because it earns favor, but because it reflects truth. Let what no longer fits fall away without regret. Let what approaches you meet discernment, not fear. And when pressure comes again, and it will meet it the same way you always have, without surrendering who you are. If this message resonated in the deepest part of you, if it felt less like information and more like recognition, write 777 in the comments, not as a ritual, but as acknowledgement. Subscribe and stay connected, because this is not the only moment heaven has marked for you. And if someone you know is quietly choosing the right thing without recognition, share this with them. They may need to know what you now know. You were seen. You were recorded. And everything ahead of you has already been filtered through the truth of who you've proven yourself to be.